Australia, the sixth largest country on Earth. An ancient, rugged, and unforgiving land with abundant animal life, both beautiful and deadly. Found within its awe-inspiring landscapes and natural beauty exists a deep history of unexplained mysteries for anyone with the courage to investigate them. Tonight, we join Ben on a journey across this vast island continent in search of answers to events that have reshaped the lives of so many that have been exposed to Unexplained Phenomena Australia. With your host, Ben Hurl.
G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. I've been out there looking around, seeing what I can find, and I thought for this week's episode we would actually go to the state of South Australia. So South Australia has a very long and rich UFO history, and this was something that I already basically knew just through my general interest in UFOs cases around Australia. And I'd seen that over many years, long-time researcher Keith Basterfield has done quite a bit of work on cases, and because he lives in South Australia, and he has a vast catalogue of reports that have come in from the 1950s and right through every decade up into the more modern period. But I think a lot of the really interesting cases occurred back during the 60s and the 70s and around that sort of time frame. It was a very active time in UFO activity here in Australia. And I'd found that there was two particular towns that I was having a look at that seemed to really have something strange going on. And the first one was the town of Gawler, which has had a history of repeated UFO encounters in and around that area of Gawler. And some of it moves out a little bit further, some of it's quite close to the town, other little hamlets and areas that live near it. So I thought we'd have a bit of a look at that today. And also the other one that was of interest was a town. It didn't actually occur in the town, it occurred out of the town. But when you're talking about South Australia, there's some vast distances between some lonely places. And that's definitely the case with a little town called Kimba as well. So, and I think that Kimba has had one of the strangest UFO cases in history. So it's a very unusual case, and I've never come across anything like it. There may well be other cases like it. It's not possible to know every possible encounter on the planet. So if anyone's seen or knows of something similar, then I'd be interested to hear about it. So Gawler and Kimba are a focus. And if we sort of have more time, I'll talk about some other stuff that I found in South Australia as well, which we'll see how we go for time. And next week's episode is going to be a big one too. So we're going to be looking at or listening to a interview done by a gentleman called Ron Hides, who had an extraordinary encounter in 1967. And his recorded interview, it hasn't been heard by anyone in 50 years. So I'm very excited to be presenting that for you next week. And don't miss that episode, because this has not been heard in a very, very long time. And it's an extraordinary testimony. And I'll have a special guest joining me on the show to dissect that. So really look forward to that. So yeah, the thing about the UFO history is that it's long and it's consistent throughout Australia. And South Australia really does echo that particular aspect of the phenomenon, the repeatedness of encounters in areas. Some people have repeated encounters. Individuals do, but there's also regions, towns, areas that have got consistent UFO reports. They may be a bit quiet now. I mean, that's an actual fact at the moment. I think that the UFO activity of the past is not being reflected now as much in the 21st century. And that's an interesting question. Why were all these high strangeness cases so prevalent 30, 40, 50 years ago? You know, and now we've got the cameras and the technology to record it, and we're not capturing those level of cases that in people driving in the outback in 1970 were having some really high strangeness, high intensity cases, and they didn't have cameras to capture it. So that's sort of one thing as well. So let's have a look at the town of Gawler and see what's been going on there. So this is where Gawler is. Let's orientate first so that we know where Gawler is. So here it is. So this is Adelaide, and Adelaide is the capital of South Australia. So that's for those of you who are overseas and don't understand Australian geography very well. And South Australia is next to Victoria, my home state. And where the little red dropper is on that map, that's where Gawler is. So it's not actually what you would call in the outback per se. It is just on the, they're still in the sort of the fringe belt north of Adelaide. So that's the location of it. And this is another shot to give you a bit more of an idea of the size of the town. So it's just your typical country town. It's bigger than a hamlet. Certainly a full-sized town. I've not been there yet, but over the last week, I've taken a great deal of interest in what has been happening over there in the past. So if I get to South Australia again, I'll be sure to head up that way, because one thing I really like doing as an investigator is to go boots on the ground and to look at the places, go to the places where the UFOs have been. And I've been to many places doing exactly that, certainly here in Victoria at this stage. So that's Gawler. And it sort of, the modern era for what happened in Gawler started around 1959. So in January, a former pilot and his family were walking along the beach at Port Gawler. And there they saw what they described as a spherical object, so a round object, which looked like polished aluminium. Now, how common is that in a description? Brushed, polished, shiny aluminium. And they saw this spherical object lift out of the water at the beach. And interestingly, it created a curtain of white underneath it. So there was a curtain of white coming down underneath it. So I'm not sure whether that was white light or whether that was water. So that's not clear in the information that I have, but there was a curtain of white light underneath it. And the object rose out of the sea to a considerable height, whatever that means, but obviously, a reasonable distance up in the sky. And it was then joined by another object which came in from the south. And both objects then moved off towards the south together, accelerating at great speed. So I was watching this video last night on UFOs under the water, and it's such an interesting concept to think that whatever tech they've got, it's capable of going air, ground, water. I've heard them going into the ground before too. So it's really a fascinating technology that's being used here. And here in this early case from 1959, you've got two objects that are appearing, and this is the area where it occurred with that particular sighting. This is Gawler Beach, which is a little bit further over from the town, but basically takes you down, and you can see that strip of sand there. That's basically the area where that encounter would have occurred. And as you can see, there's really no buildings around there. It's basically farmland abutting up to the coastline. So it's an isolated location. And there was another famous encounter that we will talk about on this show, although I'm not going over it today, is Maslin Beach. That was another famous beach-based South Australian UFO encounter with photographs taken. So we will visit that in another episode as well. I mean, there's literally that many cases that, you know, I could talk for 3 hours about all these cases and still not cover everything. So just bear that in mind. Now, in Gawler, another sighting occurred on the 28th of June in 1963 near the Sandy Creek Hotel, which is a little bit to the east of Gawler itself, by a man who was travelling towards Gawler on the Lindock and Gawler Road. And after coming around a bend, he saw on the road a blood red coloured object, 8 metres wide and 4 metres high. 8 metres wide, 4 metres high. Fairly big object. At least plane size, you know, or not even plane size, but, you know, mid-sized plane size. And it had a concave top and a flat base. And the whole red craft extended across the roadway. And that would be a shock. So the man applied the brakes and he was within about 3 metres of the object. 3 metres is not far. That's from me here across the room. Look, it's not far. Within 3 metres of an 8 metre wide object glowing red. Amazing. I would love to have that experience myself. So he's seen that there. So he got within 3 metres, and when it rose, it rose to a height of about 100 metres. So as he's approached it, got to within 3 metres of it, which is virtually indicating a collision, you would have to say. The object has lifted 100 metres into the sky. It then turned on its side. Now, that's another interesting facet of UFOs. You hear quite often that it can be a saucer shape and it will then actually turn onto its side and travel in a vertical position. And it then sped off, and it was steaming vapor of some description and changing to a light red yellow as it accelerated and flew off towards the small town of Two Wells. So that to me is an extremely interesting case. I mean, that's almost implying that you're going to actually crash into this thing and getting to within 3 metres. So I've got some imagery here for you as well, just on that particular case. So here is the Barossa Valley Way, which is the road. That's what it's called now. And you can see where that reserve is, that little green droplet that indicates where that little treed area is. So he would have been coming through that. I reckon he would have been coming through that area there on that bend. Because as you come around that bend, you come onto the straight section of the road, and that's where you sort of start to head towards that little orange dropper on the map, which is the Sandy Creek Hotel. So in that stretch of road there, that's where that would have occurred. And just for interest's sake, we've got a picture of the Sandy Creek Hotel. So there you go. For people overseas, that's an Australian pub. They're ubiquitous in Australia. And although they struggle a bit since the COVID time's been with us, you can certainly get some fantastic meals at any Australian establishment. And that's a good example of a country pub right there. And I also grabbed this image too, which I thought may have been slightly representative of what he had seen with the red lights glowing on it. But that's sort of, you know, object close to the ground, sitting on the road. All the magic that brings up for us all when we think about it. So it's a fairly startling case. And during the 1960s and the 70s, many sightings were reported, causing vigorous debate in the general public about the plausibility and the veracity of these sightings. And in the late 60s, Gawler was this hotspot for sightings in South Australia, with quite a few being reported in the Bunyip, which is an interesting name. That's the local newspaper for Gawler. It's called the Bunyip. And this was towards the end of 1968 and during 1969. So it was a very interesting time. And this is a picture of the newspaper itself, because all these reports that I'm talking about come from the Bunyip. So that's the established newspaper in Gawler. So as you can see, we'll see some more shots of some of the town, the buildings in the town, and you'll get an idea of what these little country towns are like. So, flying saucers in Gawler was the headline of the front page of the Bunyip on December the 4th, 1968, just before I was born. And at least 7 people claimed that they saw 2 flying saucers hovering over the Gawler Institute and High Street Hall at about 10 p.m. on November the 27th, 1968, so a few days earlier. And the 2 UFOs were said to be brightly lit by bright red and blue lights, which constantly changed from one colour to the other, from red to blue, red to blue. And according to the witnesses, the UFOs hovered over the Institute and Hall for about 20 minutes, a reasonable amount of time, before briefly moving together, separating, switching off their lights, and moving away. 5 of the witnesses, so 5, a woman and her family who lived in Gawler East, were reported to have watched from the car park at the rear of Harnett and George's Chemists. And after the initial sightings, which would be a drugstore for those in America, and after the initial sightings, the woman was said to have returned to the house and smoked a cigarette. So I imagine that was to perhaps calm down and help process the experience of seeing 2 objects in the sky. And 2 other witnesses confirmed that they'd also seen the UFOs, but no one was able to judge the height, size, or distance accurately. And the Bunyip, the local newspaper, appealed to anyone who had witnessed the events to come forward and say, we want to hear from you. So that was on December the 4th, 1968. So the Gawler Institute and the Civic Centre are here. This is what they look like. So this is rather lovely looking buildings that are built in these country towns, and they've got a lot of character about them. On the left is the Institute, and then on the other side is the actual hall. So that's the buildings, and also the rear, which is High Street. Oops, there we go. That's the rear of those buildings where the objects were seen. And this is a little representation that I found that, maybe give us some indication of what the objects may have been with red and blue lights, something like that. So, but these objects are appearing, with impunity, really, and obviously at a reasonable height where people can actually see them. So another interesting little sight. And then during the period of June to August, so we've moved from November to June to August 1969, more sightings of UFOs were again reported in the Bunyip. And the first headline was UFOs surprise the Gawley Postie, which is the postman in Australian language. UFOs surprise the Gawler Postie. And while clearing the Barnett Road letterbox at a little before 7 a.m. in the morning on June 18th, 1969, the young postman said or claimed that he saw in the sky a UFO which appeared to be travelling north. He said that it was black inside and around the outside was a bright white light. In fact, the brightest white light he had ever seen. So that's an interesting report. I've not personally heard of a UFO like that before. He said it was, so black and with a white light. So interesting. He said it was not exactly round and it had a white line running through the centre. The white light stayed on for about 30 seconds and then gradually disappeared, to be replaced by a very bright red light, so which also stayed on for about 30 seconds. And when he was asked about the height, the young postman said, didn't seem very high, but admitted again that it was difficult to judge height and distance. And he also said that prior to the sightings, he did not believe in flying saucers. And now, having seen one, he was convinced, and he only wished that he had a camera with him. And that was an article in the Bunyip newspaper, June 19, 1969. So, and one thing I'd just like to say to people is that height is very hard to judge. It's extremely hard to judge. And what I recommend doing is on your phone, downloading the flight tracker app, because that's very helpful for estimating height. Because you can go outside, if you see a plane in the sky, you can click on your local area on the app, and it brings up the plane and it shows you its actual real-time altitude. And I've done that many times. Just even if I'm at work, I'll run out. If I see a plane coming, I'll run outside and I'll get the app and I'll check the app and I'll see, yes, he's traveling at 900 miles an hour at 36,000 feet on the way to Auckland, New Zealand, for example. And I can see the size of the aircraft, the distance it is, and it's very helpful. Even for smaller planes in the sky, you might have an air ambulance traveling at 5,000 feet, and you can see the air ambulance, and you can see it's traveling at 5,000 feet. So the modern apps are very helpful to give you a bit of an idea on how to estimate the height of objects. Now, night is a different story because that's particularly difficult at night to see because you've only got a black reference. So it's a lot harder at night to be accurate. And I can see and understand why these witnesses were having trouble with estimating the actual height. So that's just a tip on if you want to get an idea on judging height, then download Flight Tracker or similar, and you'll start to get a bit of an idea on estimating height. So, moving on. Another UFO sighting occurred near Balaclava on the evening of June 17, 1969. So we're still in the same month at about 6 p.m. And 3 people from Gawler and 1 from Elizabeth were returning from a football carnival at Balaclava when they witnessed the landing of a strange object in a large paddock next to the Hamley Bridge Road. So they saw it land, which I find fascinating, that you can actually watch a UFO landing. You know, I'd be straight over there. The witness stayed for some time to watch the UFO, where it had parked close to a couple of gum trees, or eucalyptus trees is another way of describing them. One of the witnesses described the object as unlike anything they'd ever seen before. So that's very interesting. And he sketched it. And he said, having spent most of his life working in various fields of electronics, he could not equate the object with anything he had seen before. But he supposed that it could possibly have been some kind of experimental vehicle. And that's interesting that a lot of people will leap to it's the government, it's the military, it's a military vehicle. And that's quite a logical way to think about it too, without any dramas at all. So this is Gawler to Balaclava, and you can see Gawler at the bottom of the map there, just up from Elizabeth. There's Elizabeth at the bottom of the map, then you've got Gawler, and then moving up to, you've got Balaclava, that's where they went to the football carnival. And on the road where they've come back down, that takes you down to the area where they actually had the encounter. So, and I thought, here it is. So this is the area where the sighting was. You know, it's like when you download 50 pictures for a presentation and you wonder where one got to. I just had one of those moments. So this is the town of Hamley Bridge. So a lot smaller place. So, you know, tiny little sort of a town on the river there. And this is the object that the witness actually, or the picture that he drew of the object that they saw coming back from the football carnival, that's the object that they saw landed on the ground. So that almost looks to me like it's light emanating from the top of it rather than a spiky haircut. So that's the witness's drawing of that particular object. So this is obviously in the Gawler surrounding district area. So that's an interesting, always love witnesses' drawings. And the next reported sighting occurred on June 27th, 1969 at around about 4 a.m. and this time on the Carlton Road. The witness, a woman, was awoken by a noise rather like a loud motor car engine, and looking out of her window, she saw a flat, round object in the sky coming towards Gawler from the direction of the Barossa Valley. And the object, now the Barossa Valley is a huge wine area in Australia. So just there's a lot of Australia's good wines are produced there. And the object was described as having white lights around the outside, and a very bright light was shining on the ground below it. And the object appeared to hover over the Carlton Road, close to the witness's house, but she said she could not judge distance or height. Very consistent theme here. And after a few minutes, the object left, apparently heading back towards the Barossa Valley. And the witness was left wondering about what exactly she had seen, and she returned to her bed. This is again in the little local newspaper of Gawler, the Bunyip, on July 9th, 1969. So just another little quick picture there here. So this is the Carlton Road area. So if you look to the left, right-hand side of that map, you can see Carlton Road. So that's right on the fringes of Gawler, with perhaps sort of open land to the south of that area. And Carlton Road obviously extends right back into the town as well. So it's an access road into the township of Gawler directly. And backtracking for a moment, this picture is the area where that postman had his encounter. So I went down Barnett Road, and he was emptying one of those street side post boxes. So I mean, this is a long time ago, and it may not necessarily have been exactly in that location, but logically, I think it perhaps would have been, because that general store looks like it's been there for an incredibly long period of time. So even if that red box above the blue car was not the actual box that he used, it could have been replaced at any time in 40, 50 years. I still think that this is most logically that area where a mailbox would have been located, right next to the general store. So that's just another picture that I had. So I'm a real Google mapper. If you've been watching the show, you'll be familiar that I like to get out there and go to the locations on Google Maps, because it's just so hard to get there in person. When Australia is such a big country, you have to use Google Maps to help you out in that regard. And heading into August, on the morning of August 3, 1969, a number of people reported a sighting what they believed to be a flying saucer in the Sandy Creek, Rosedale area. So again, another sighting back like the gentleman who had the one near the Sandy Creek Hotel. So this is in the same similar area, and I think Rosedale is slightly north of that area. And one witness, who was a resident of Sandy Creek, said that he'd heard what sounded like a diesel engine on the railway line, followed by a rumbling noise and a few minutes silence, and then a buzzing noise, which grew into a rushing noise. And another witness not only heard the sound, but saw the object sitting in a paddock about a quarter mile from his house. And the object was circular, with a bright red circumference and a moving yellow orb in the center of the circle. Now that's interesting too, isn't it? The fact that he's still describing it as red, still describing it as yellow. Now, witnesses' descriptions can vary quite considerably, even though they're looking at the same object, which is a constant problem for investigators. But he's describing a red object and a yellow object, so it's kind of not without its parallels to the other gentlemen's who saw the object on the road. So circular with a bright red circumference and a moving yellow orb in the center of the circle. And the witnesses thought it might have had a diameter, here's an estimated size, of about 25 feet and could have been hovering close to the ground. And as he watched, the object took off slowly and gathering speed before heading south. And 3 other people also had a similar sighting on that morning. This is in the Bunyip, August 6th, 1969. So another interesting encounter. And I'm just seeing if I've got a picture of that area. Let's have a look. Yeah, so it's just to the north. That's the same picture, but it's up to the north of that map is where that area was. Sorry, this is the right one. All these Google Maps look the same. So yeah, so you've got Gawler here in the center of the map, and as you move out to the east, you've got Sandy Creek out there, and the Rosedale area is up to the north of that area. So you can see that around Gawler, around that town, there was certainly some strange things occurring at that time in 1969. So, and a few days later, 2 people in the Rosedale area had a similar experience while picking up a newspaper at around 9 p.m. The witness saw a circular object with a reddish glow outside and a white glow inside. So we've got red glow, white glow, yellow glow being reported. And it was moving over a paddock near her house. The witness said she was frightened it would land, but it just hovered for a few minutes. And she said she did not say anything to her family as they simply would not have believed her. August 6th, 1969 in the Bunyip. So interesting. And since that spate of sightings in the 60s, Gawler has been revisited again. And on the evening, and coming more into the modern era, on March 27, 2004, a person reported driving near Gawler and seeing a ball-shaped object which glowed white like phosphorescence. It flashed across the intersection of the road on which he was driving at the top of a small rise from east to west at about 20 metres off the ground and made no sound. And later that same year, 2004, at 3:45 a.m., which is just about the devil's hour, really, on December 18, 2 people travelling on the Port Wakefield Road near Wild Horse Plains, love these names, saw an enormous object which was shaped like a large hamburger. And at the bottom, it had a bright red dome with a glow around it, above which were flashing lights that extended all around the perimeter, seemingly recessed into the object. The lights were yellow, red, white, orange, green, and blue, and they flashed on and off in a sequence. You know, think Close Encounters of a Third Kind. And across the top of the object were what looked like bright fluorescent blue building blocks staggered to different heights. So this is quite a detailed description. On the other side of the road was another smaller and different object, 2 objects, shaped like a bright white candle, below which was a ball of bright orange red with an aura surrounding it. Both objects were moving in the same direction at about 30 metres off the ground and seemed to be chasing the car, much to the horror of the occupants. And after about 30 kilometres, both objects disappeared, much to the relief of the witnesses who continued on their way to Gawler. That's in 2004. Quite a high intensity encounter. So, and this was the area where that happened. So you can see, what are we looking at here? We can see that Gawler is down in the lower right-hand side of that corner of this map, sorry, and then up where that red dropper is. So we're still in that same vicinity, and this is the area in here where that dropper was coming down. So they're coming down this road, heading back towards Gawler, and just another representational object just to fuel our imaginations as we discuss these very interesting and high intense encounters. Okay, time's moving on, and it's time to shift gears and locations. We're going to start looking at what I reckon is one of the strangest encounters ever. And this was in the town of Kimba, South Australia. Kimba is to the north of, it's further north and a little bit over from where Gawler is. And I think I might have a map of that. So where are we? So I'll just have a look. This is the type of area where it is. So it's much more desolate out there. And Gawler is down at the bottom half of this map, right down the bottom left-hand side is where Gawler is. And as you move into that brown territory, that's where this extraordinary encounter occurred. So, and that line is basically the distance that shows where the encounter occurred. And I put in a lot of time to try and find that location, and we've got some more interesting things to talk about that as well. So on the 4th of February 1973, so you've got activity happening in Gawler around 1969, flap occurring down there, moving across to Kimba on the 4th of February 1973, 4 witnesses had a very extraordinary encounter. All of them were 4 people in 3 separate vehicles reported seeing an orange light in a clearing on a deserted stretch of country road. An orange object in a clearing. And a young couple said they saw a 3-meter high by 1.5 meter wide rectangle shape. One of them said they saw a 2-meter tall man in a white spacesuit floating in the middle of the rectangular shape. So you've got this bright orange rectangular shape, and there's a man in a white suit floating in the middle of it. The other saw an orange rectangle with a white blob on top of it. Later, a semi-trailer driver reported to police that as he passed a clearing, he noted what looked like an open doorway and a figure standing in the doorway. The police checked the clearing by going there within an hour, but found nothing to account for the observation. So that's extraordinary. And there's another car as well. But we'll focus on the couple for now. So the couple were a gentleman by the name of Hunt, and his female passenger was Finkler. And they were driving a car 34 kilometres out of Kimba. And that was when Mr. Hunt saw a strange light on the western side of the highway just off the road. The red and orange rectangle of light appeared 10 feet high by 5 feet wide and 2 to 3 feet off the ground. So it's quite large. And inside this light was the figure of a person, some 6 feet tall, in a white spacesuit with a mask over the head and the face. The female passenger, Miss Finkler, who was dozing at the time, woke to see the light, but not the figure of the person. Mr. Hunt reported that incident to the Kimba police. So when they got to Kimba, they returned to the site with the police. It's in 1973, and Kimba's a small place, and the police took him seriously enough to go and have a look. And the police regarded Mr. Hunt as reliable and could not explain the event. And later the police advised the Royal Australian Air Force that 2 other independent witnesses had reported seeing the orange light in the same location within a 15-minute period. And the Royal Australian Air Force advised the Kimba police that a possible theoretical cause of the sighting was known as igneous fatus, swamp gas, which doesn't sound really like that plausible to me. So the story kind of got out into the Whaler news on February 16th. And Keith Basterfield was one of the investigators on this actual case. And they didn't receive the case until the 24th of February. So, so the time's marching on by the time they received it. And the investigators telephoned Mr. Hunt in Kimba, and he wasn't available at the time. And so a reply paid telegram was sent and a reply was received. And they made arrangements to interview him and go up there to interview Mr. Hunt and Miss Finkler on the 3rd of March. And 4 of them went up there to do the investigation from South Australia, from Adelaide. And that was Keith Basterfield, Ray Brooke, Dean Pavison, and Peter Powell. And so the location was between Kimba and another little blowhole called Iron Knob. So the investigation team stopped at the location, and the terrain was flat land, 3 to 6 metre high trees and smaller scrub set in a deep reddish orange coloured dry barren sort of a soil. That's what it's like out there. And there's a barbed wire fence that lay between 20 to 30 metres parallel to the road and the location. And visibility was limited to about 50 to 100 metres into the scrub. So this is the investigators looking at that location, seeing what you could actually see, depending on the angle of where you were in relation to the trees. And they went to Kimba and they interviewed Miss Finkler, and her father confirmed that on the night in question, the couple had returned home at about 10:30 p.m. And he'd noticed that Mr. Hunt was white-faced and trembling so much that he was unable to light a cigarette for himself. And the couple had then related the occurrence of what actually happened to her father. And as a result of which, the police then came over and they went to the location. The investigators called the local constable, who was Constable Summerton, and his wife answered the phone and suggested that her husband come over and join the conversation, the local policeman. And when he arrived, the young couple again related what had occurred on the night in question. And the events relating to the police's participation were confirmed by the constable. And he advised the investigators that he had been out to the site and inspected it, but he had found no evidence on which to base a conclusion. So, but you've had 3 independent vehicles see this. We had the couple, Mr. Hunt and Mrs. Finkler, who were travelling in one car, and in front of them was a Mr. I, which I don't have his name, and following both cars was a semi-trailer driven by a Mr. D. So 2 cars in front, followed by the truck. So now the young couple were driving between Port Pirie and Kimba, and the incident occurred some kilometres out of Kimba. And Mr. Hunt said that he noticed what he'd first called a red flare to their right and forward, just off the road in the clearing. And as he passed, he had a brief look and he saw that rectangular shape, orange-red in colour, 3 metres high by 1.5 wide, with a sharply defined figure in what he called a white spacesuit floating in the middle of this red rectangle. And this is what makes this case really extraordinary, in my opinion, is this is what he drew. So that's the witness's sketch of the object. So you've got this red and orange square, rectangular shape, 3 metres tall, floating in which you've got this man or this humanoid in a white suit. So it's not even like a flying saucer, a UFO, a UAP. It's not. It's a rectangle with this object in it. Now, this is a photo that represents it at the location, one of Keith's pictures. And you can see there that at the actual location, you've got this 3 clumps of trees, and in front of it there is this representation, which I think is Keith standing there, and a little shape has been put over the top of him to represent the rectangle, and the photo's been taken from the road as the 3 vehicles have gone past. And this picture here gives you an illustration of it drawn by the investigators. So overcast dark sky, the rectangle is bright and red. It's 2 to 3 feet off the ground, no illumination on the ground. So this is another interesting point about this particular case with all UFO sightings, or many UFO sightings. They don't cast shadows. So it's brightly lit, but it casts no shadows. Here's a floating rectangle with a white humanoid suited being in it in the middle of this clearing. And this is kind of like describing, they're showing you, their views of it. And this is Keith interviewing Mr. Hunt and Miss Finkler at the time of the sighting when they visited it. And here we've got the investigators at the actual location. So 1973, driving out there. And I did a lot of work on this myself, all the way here from Victoria, which we'll talk about that shortly. So that's the strange thing about this case. That's why I think it's one of the strangest cases ever. It's almost like a portal. This rectangle is almost like some sort of a portal door almost, if you like, and something is there. But who really knows what it is? That's just one possibility. And so the figure looked like an ordinary human being. I'll bring that back up for a tick. So the figure like an ordinary human being in respect of shape and outline, and appeared to be motionless a metre or so above the ground, with a metre of orange colour below him. His arms and legs were pointed slightly downwards, covered all over in white. And it should be remembered that this description is based at the most on a 2 to 3 second observation, because they were driving past, so they didn't see it for that long. The driver accelerated the car from 90 kilometres an hour he had been doing, and at the same time he motioned to Miss Finkler's attention that there was something out there. And it was some seconds before she understood, but she turned in her seat to look, and she related that she saw a deep orange-coloured rectangular-shaped thing with a white blob on top of it in the clearing. And she turned around to comment on it, and upon turning back, observed that the orange glow now appeared to extend right across the road behind them. So the glow had come out behind them. And several seconds later, she looked again, but they had gone over a slight rise, and she couldn't see anything at this point in time. And at this time, Mr. Hunt had been concentrating on getting them out of there and driving. And they drove to Mrs. Finkler's house, told her father, the police came, and the couple all went, and he took the couple back out to the clearing. And they arrived back out there at 11 p.m. at night, and took a good look around with torches, and the ground was searched for tracks, but none of any kind could be found. And that makes sense, because the object was hovering above the ground. It wasn't actually on the ground. And it didn't leave any blast marks or any landing impressions on the ground, because it actually wasn't resting on the ground. And in the days that followed, a truck driver, he came and told the Kimba police that he had passed the same spot at 10 o'clock. And he said inside the fence line, there was something which appeared to be a brightly lit, and he described it as a caravan doorway or an RV doorway, except that it was much taller than a normal doorway, giving it a rectangular shape that was twice as high as wide. It had a white outlined shape inside it, and he did not stop to take a look. So he's indicating that there's a rectangle on the side of the road with a white shape inside it. So, and Mr. Hunt related that a car had passed them just prior to reaching the clearing. And the driver of this vehicle said that he passed the clearing. He saw a glow of light, rectangular shaped, orange in colour, which would have been a chain of about a chain or two outside the normal fence line. So, pretty dramatic encounter on the side of a lonely stretch of road by 3 independent cars and 4 witnesses. So that picture that I've shown you there is actually drawn by the policeman. So he noted down the details, including a sketch of the object, and the man, Mr. Hunt, he drew it. And 2 other people had reported to him that he's seen this same object. So the policeman's had 1 car, another car, truck, and people have said this actually happened. This is a really, really weird event. So what do we make of all of that? Now, this is where it gets interesting. So I thought I thought I'll try and find this. Take that down again. I thought I'll try and find this particular location. Challenging, but I love a challenge. This is 1973, this encounter occurred, 1973. And I thought, I'm going to get on that road and I'm going to Google Map walk the road. Now, the witnesses described it as being about 50 to 52 kilometres north of Kimba. And that's all I had in terms of trying to find this location. So I'll bring up that other map again. So this is showing you Kimba's down on the left bottom side there, and this is the way, and the white line represents the road, and that represents the journey. Now, up to that point there is where, mind you, they were coming the other direction, but this line is to represent the approximate area of that Kimba location. Now, I went out there and I started, so I thought I'll go about 50 kilometres out and I'll try and walk that road, looking at each side of the road, see if I can find that location as it is on Google Maps today. Now, that is a big challenge, and here's why. As you can see in this picture, the Google truck, for some reason, does not travel in the area of the sighting. The Google truck the camera was on, coming from the south and then from the north. But in the crucial area of the location, the Google Map truck does not work. It did not film the road in that area. The entire journey is recorded, but for that location, it is not recorded for that location. That was interesting. Come back to some other pictures. This is the area where it actually occurred, on this stretch of the road in there. Now, what I did was I went in and I walked the road and I tried to find where these trees were, because they're fairly distinctive trees. They could well and truly be not standing anymore in the years that have passed. But this is the terrain that is very representational of that location out there where this rectangular object appeared. And this is the furthest point where the Google map goes to, where it starts to get interesting, where the trees get a little taller and a little more established, which were looking like the trees in the actual area. This is where it starts to look, but this is right where the Google map actually cuts out. So, and you can see there on this image here, where I've got those two little white dots in the center, that's that area right there. But I did find some interesting things along the way. So that's the center tree, which I took a close-up of, and there's the rectangular object with Keith representing the lit up white being inside the rectangle. That's it there. And I found this tree, which was sort of representational of it, of what that tree may have been like. The shape is very, very similar. So you've got that distinct V shape, and this tree is similar and in very much the same way. So remember, these estimations are only estimated areas. So I could still have actually found that location. And this here is sort of relatively representational. That's a view back from that tree. So we are right in the zone of that area. And here's another picture of it here as well. So that was the location. And I thought that this case, I'd not heard of a case where you've got a floating rectangle of light with three independent vehicles, all passing it, all reporting the same thing. It's a very strange case that you would have this lit up doorway with a white suited humanoid in there in the middle of nowhere. the absolute middle of nowhere, as you can see by those photos. And I spent probably 2 hours hunting up and down that road trying to find that location, knowing it was an incredibly hard task after all these years from 1973 to find that area. But I did the best I could. And it's right in the zone. But isn't it interesting that the Google Map truck does not go into that area? So I'll note, I'll leave you to contemplate and think about this week's episode. And as I said, next week is an absolutely great show coming up when we bring out this recording of the encounter by Ron Hydes in 1967 in the Albury-Wodonga area with a landed UFO and 2 occupants. He was riding a motorcycle, and this interview has not been heard in all those years, in over 50 years, 54 years. So I invite you to join me next week. Don't miss this upcoming episode. It really will be a very fascinating and interesting one. This episode we've just done has also focused on some of the humanoid cases. That Kimba case is extremely strange. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I look forward to catching up with you again next week. And we will absolutely do it all again. So, see you then. Enjoy your night.